Today's show is brought to you by podcastersmastery.com, the premier online community teaching you to podcast like a pro. Check us out now at podcastersmastery.com.
When we're young, we have an amazing positive outlook about how great life is going to be, but somewhere along the line, we forget to dream and end up settling. Join Up Dots features amazing people who refuse to give up and chose to go after their dreams. This is your blueprint for greatness. So here's your host, live from the back of his garden in the UK, David Ralph.
Yes, hello there. Across the world, welcome to Join Up Dots. This is episode 335, and this is one I've been looking forward to for a long time. We actually started recording this a couple of weeks ago, and we had this solar eclipse, and something weird happened. I don't know what happened, but my whole system went a bit skew-whiff. So fortunately, the chap is here today, and we are going to really delve into his life, because it is a fascinating one, because he's an award-winning author, adventurer, and sustainability campaigner, specialising in human-powered expeditions. Now, if you don't know what this means, just remember the last time you thought you would pop to the shops and you think, I'll take the car, it'd be so much easier. Well, our guest today is recognised by Guinness World Records as the first person to circumnavigate the Earth without using motors or sails. Walking, cycling, inline skating 5 continents, kayaking, swimming, rowing and pedalling a boat across the rivers, seas and oceans of the world. Now, if that sounds hard, just think, this took 13 years to complete. It was 46,505 mile journey and was hailed the last great first for circumnavigation by the London Sunday Times. But this is just a tiny part of what this guy is all about. Now, life is more than just getting his name in the Guinness Book of Records, as he's also visited more than 900 schools in 37 countries to date, involving thousands of students in a variety of programs in conjunction with UNESCO's Associated Schools Program Network. And while he's in the schools, he shares his tales of adventure and hardship to promote world citizenship, zero carbon emission travel and awareness of individual lifestyle choices on the health of the planet. Now, this is going to be an amazing story of taking chances, inspiring the world, hardship, but of course savouring those life experiences that you can only get by putting yourself out there. So when he was growing up in Catterick, Yorkshire in northern England, was he inspired by the world and loved nothing more than flicking through the pages of an atlas? And can you just go into countries wherever you want, or do you actually have to find the border crossings? I've always wondered that, whether you can just stroll in. Well, and I suppose the last thing, is does he get told by everyone that he meets that, Jason, I'd love to be doing what you do, and think, well, why aren't you then? Well, let's find out as we bring onto the show to start joining up dots with the one and only Mr. Jason Lewis. How are you, Jason?
I'm very well, David. Yourself?
I'm extremely well. I'm firing on all cylinders today. I don't know what's come over me. The last few days I felt really sluggy, like I put too much effort into it. But today I feel good. And you must know that
high
feeling.
Octane.
Yeah, but have you known that feeling in your life? Because, I'm going to cut straight to the chase on here. I normally do a preamble, but there's so much to talk to you about. 13 years of travel. There must be some sluggy days when you wake up and think, the last thing I want to do is get on my bike and pedal.
Too many of them. And that's the thing. You just hit the nail on the head. People read the bio that you just read out and they think, oh wow, your life must be amazing, and like you just sort of constantly on a high and having a fantastic time in some exotic parts of the world, and the reality is that probably 90% of my life, like any person's life, is a lot of hard work and grind and sitting behind a desk very often, writing books or whatever, and on the journey itself there was a lot of grinding away at the pedals. Some days it would be wonderful and I would just lose myself in the experience of being out there on an ocean thousands of miles from anywhere. Other days it was just like, oh, this is so boring, this is so samey. And I wish I was back in London instead of sitting behind a desk some days. So yeah, it's not, of course, always how people might expect it to be.
Well, since you were coming on the show, I've become a bit of a fanboy, and I've been sort of like researching you. And I'll be honest, I have got adventure in me. I love the thought of doing this, but I couldn't do this. The thought that it's going to be 13 years of your life without your family or whatever, and you can't stop, because as soon as you stop, you've failed. You've just got to keep on going. Was it one of those 8 pints of lager conversations in a pub one night when it seemed like a good idea, but then actually the real sort of realization came in later?
Well, funnily you should mention that. It did start off as an idea that involved alcohol, predictably enough, perhaps. And it was, the idea originally was a friend of mine, Steve Smith, who I went to college with, was working at the time in Europe as an environmental scientist. And he was got a bit disillusioned with his job. He was looking out of the window one rainy Monday morning in Brussels, and he thought of this idea, which no one had done before. And he and I had sort of done some quite sort of wacky weekend trips at college, just taking random trains out of London and walking in no particular direction with no camping gear and sleeping in hay barns and crawling into the back of pub windows at night to sleep and that kind of thing. Just really to sort of to have these little mini adventures. So he thought, okay, this is obviously some guy who is unhinged enough to do this trip with. So he called me up, and we ended up in his apartment in Paris. This was a bit later on one night, and after several beers, and he pitched me the idea. And I can honestly say, at that time, I had a little window cleaning business in London, and I was not really going anywhere with the crappy band that I was playing with in the evenings. So I just agreed to join immediately. And looking back on it, that night, that seminal night, changed the rest of my life.
It is fascinating, that moment, that, you know, you're not Indiana Jones, you've not got Explorer stamped on you, but you think that you can tackle something that, quite simply, I don't think many people, given the challenge, but it's going to take 13 years, would be able to do it. What was in you at that time, other than the beers, that made you think, I could do this, it's worth doing?
Well, I should mention that the next morning when we woke up with a hangover, predictably, and normally when you have these ideas, you wake up in the morning and you think, what were we talking about? That was the most stupid idea to row a lilo across the channel to France, or whatever, or, you know, go down Everest wearing a thong on a tea tray, or whatever it might be. And you think,
you're planning all these, aren't you, Jason? I can tell it.
This is my bucket list.
Yes.
No, that's my younger self talking. But on this occasion, we woke up. We thought, actually, that's a really good idea. You know, people have rowed across oceans and people have biked across land masses, but no one's done a continuous thread around the planet. But the thing that really appealed to me, because I never have seen myself as a so-called adventurer, explorer type. I was in the army, but for a very short period, I knew that it wasn't for me. And most adventure types, they tend to be either from the army, or they are people who, they've always wanted to be an explorer. And so it happened really by accident for me. But I think the thing that really appealed to me about this idea was that theoretically anybody could do it. It didn't involve mountaineering, where you would, have to be an expert. It didn't involve expensive equipment like yachts and aeroplanes. It's like, if you could put one foot in front of the other, if you could ride a bicycle, then you could do this journey around the world. And that simplicity was the thing that really appealed to me. And I thought, yeah, why not? Why not anyone with no previous experience do this? And that was, I think, the thing that really appealed to me the most.
The fascinating part from this as well, that I thought when I was reading it, was that the fact you come up with this idea, and it's quite obviously an idea that inspires people. The fact that you're on this show, and I imagine you've done thousands of shows, and people are fascinated by this. But when it came to actually getting people to back you financially, you found it very, very difficult, almost impossible, that nobody would actually put their name or their money up. And so you ended up down in Portugal, I believe, basically setting off with just enough food to pedal across the Atlantic, get to Miami, and then make it up as you go along. Now, is that just kind of how you always are? Are you very much what's the worst going to happen kind of person? Or were you so seduced by the romance of it all that you just thought, somebody's going to buy into this? If I feel this strongly about it, somebody's going to buy into it.
Well, this was the idea, because originally we were going to go east about, so we would have cycled through Siberia, Russia and Siberia. But because we couldn't get sponsorship, which ended up being part of the reason why it took so long, 13 years. Originally, if we had the money up front, we could have probably done it in 3 or 4 years, but we didn't know that at the time, of course, before setting out. So, but because we had to borrow a bit of money off family and friends, enough to get going, we thought, well, we don't want to run out of money in Siberia in the middle of winter. That would not be fun. So let's go the other way around the world, arrive in America first, and hopefully we will pick up some funding there. But there was no guarantee, and there was a real expectation on both our parts that once we arrived in Miami with literally, I mean, we had the clothes we were standing up in, and we had $50 that a passing AT&T cable laying ship had given us partway across the Atlantic. That's all we had, and we really didn't know what to expect. We thought, the expedition may just fail here. But part of the ethos of this journey, and I think it ties into the ethos of your show, is that even if you don't know how things are going to turn out, and that's not a good enough reason to begin. And I think it was Goethe, the German philosopher, who said, if you dream, if you have an idea, something that you really want to do, I'm paraphrasing here, then the most important thing is to begin it. Because as you get into a dream or an expedition, you'll meet people along the way. And as we found, circumstances will arise that you couldn't possibly have predicted at the beginning that will allow you to then move on to the next stage. And that, for me, was part of the beauty of this particular journey, was that it wasn't some multi-million-pound sponsored event where we would blaze through countries and nobody would be any the wiser. We could only move forward when we had met the people of the world, people who provided us with the means to keep on going. So in that sense, it wasn't just a human-powered circumnavigation, it was very much a people-powered one as well.
I was speaking to a gentleman called Will Hodson, and he is super cycling man, and basically he's riding his bike over 5 continents, one of them being the Arctic or the Antarctic, is certainly the snowy place, dressed as Superman. And he started it off as something to do in the school holidays because he was a teacher, and now it's become his full-time gig, and off he goes. And he says that more often than not, the world is full of smiling people. People are... They embrace somebody doing something, because more often than not we don't. We go to work, we support our family, and we give ourselves all the excuses in the world. And he says that basically the world smiles wherever he goes. Now, of course, he's dressed as Superman, so that's a bit bizarre when he sort of cycles in. But do you find the same thing wherever you go? Is there a happiness to see you because people embrace your spirit?
Not always, no. I've recycled through parts of the world where I've been stoned, literally, through Tibet. The children would lie in wait for me at the beginning, at the outside of villages, and pelt me with stones. In Ethiopia is the worst place.
How did they know you were coming then, Jason?
They saw me down there because there's no trees, so they just saw me from half a mile away.
Oh, right.
And places like Ethiopia, where the kids are out on the land taking care of the flocks of sheep and goats. Again, I would get whole hordes of kids like pelting, and it wasn't really out of maliciousness. They were just having a fantastic time, and I sort of realized, for these people, and this is something I experienced in other parts of the world. They actually can't relate to someone taking off for many years on a bicycle. I think the vast majority of people who live in the world, they would never get to do a trip like the trip I've done, because life for them revolves around working very long hours in the fields, perhaps, or in a factory, and just scraping enough food and money together to support their family, to put food on the table. So I think you have to be a bit careful when you say that. Yeah, I mean, there are good people everywhere. There are a few bad apples, but as a traveller from a relatively well-to-do, affluent country like the UK, you have to be I think aware that when you go through poorer parts of the world, the people in those parts of the world are probably never going to get to do a trip like you're doing. So I found like I had to sort of bear that in mind sometimes, because people always ask, "Where's your family? What are you doing? How can you possibly afford to do a trip like this?" So, but yeah, getting back to the kids, initially I remember being pelted by kids in Tibet and thinking, "Oh well, I must be the politically correct traveller from the outside, and I must sort of laugh it off." And after a while, you know what? I just would put my bike down, and I would just pick up a load of stones and I would return fire, because these kids, they knew what they were doing. They would just and
did they like that you were doing it, or were they shocked?
They loved it. They thought this was hilarious, because most travellers, when they go through, they think, "Oh, well, I must be appropriate, and I'm a visitor in their country." No, I'm like, "No, I'm sorry. That is not appropriate. Doesn't matter if I'm a traveller from another country. You should not throw stones at anyone." So I think they kind of like. I basically called them on their shit. It's like, you shouldn't do that, and I'm going to play your game at your level, and they thought that was hilarious.
So how long did Steve stay with you? Because I was trying to get a spin of this, and it sounded like as you are the first person, it was either that the two of you were coming into the home straight and you started pedalling faster than him and got there, or he sort of dipped out somewhere. What happened with him?
Well, I mean, we set off as a team, and if he had continued, we would have finished as a team together. So he was never trying to beat because we were the first. There was no need to try and break any speed records. I mean, 13 years. Come on. I mean, you could probably do it on your hands and knees faster than that.
Yeah, but that last 100 yards, if you knew you could be the one in the record books, wouldn't you keep on speeding up?
Yeah, well, that's the problem now. I mean, there are people out there trying to do human-powered circumnavigations as we speak, and of course now the onus is to do it faster, do it in a slightly different way. So, and that's the problem with adventures is typically, if you're the first person to do it, then you have the luxury of doing it in your own time and in your own. And sort of how you want to do it, but then there's added pressure thereafter to either do it faster or to find some gimmicky way to do it a bit differently, which of course I think sort of somewhat can become a little bit trivial. Expeditions become sort of stunts essentially. But no, for us, we had the luxury of doing it our own way. Steve got as far as Hawaii 5 years into the trip, so we pedaled across the Atlantic. We crossed the US separately, actually, because by the time we reached Miami after pedaling across the Atlantic, let's put it this way, we needed a break from each other. We had spent a long time, within this tiny little boat together. So we thought, well, let's pedal separately. Let's do the US separately before the Pacific. 3 times the length of the Atlantic. And so once we reached Hawaii, Steve decided at that point that he didn't really enjoy being on the boat. He nearly drowned on the Atlantic after a capsize we had, and the whole novelty of being nomadic was starting to wear off. So he decided to go home.
Is that a regret? Would you have liked to have had somebody? Because I've done road trips for like 2 weeks with people, and we've fallen out in that 2 weeks just being with each other for 24 hours, and that's when you're in a comfortable environment in a hotel room and all that kind of stuff. So to actually be pedaling across the Atlantic, it must really put a strain on you. So when he said farewell, was it a relief, or did you think, we started this together, it would have been great to finish it?
To be honest, at the time, I was happy both for him, because I think it was the right decision for him to make, even though he took a lot of flack in the media for supposedly abandoning his mate. I was happy because it's difficult to be traveling with someone who is not enjoying themselves. It just creates a lot of tension, and on this boat where you can't get away from the other person. I mean, you're literally within 4 feet of the other person 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and everything is a shared experience. There's no privacy at all. you can't create your own space. So when you have someone there who's not having a good time, it drags you down as well. So I was happy for him to leave. But there were then points in the trip thereafter when I was alone, and although I had other people join me, other friends join me for different legs, there were big portions of the journey thereafter that I did alone, and those were the times when I thought, it'd be really nice to have Steve here, because we did start something quite special, and we did have this history of trying to get this sort of improbable journey off the ground. I mean, 2 years of planning and preparation back in London with no money before we left. I mean, we went through a lot. So in some ways, when I did finally finish it 13 years later, stepping over the line at Greenwich in East London, I thought, it would in a way be nice to do it with the guy that I started it with. But hey, that's part of the journey.
I was watching Ewan McGregor and Charlie Boorman the other night with my son. He loves those programs, and you appeared, and you were suddenly on it. It was the Long Way Down, and obviously they travel down on these journeys, and they've got a support crew, and they've got a camera crew, and all that kind of stuff. Is that the way to do it? Is the way that you did it sort of too risky, really? Should you have support? Should you have a medical team? Should you have all that kind of stuff?
Well, if you're good in front of a camera, which I'm not, then it probably is a good way to do it, because Charlie and Ewan, I see them as, especially Ewan, they're entertainers. Yeah, so they are providing an entertainment resource for viewers on television, and they're very good at what they do. And some people have said, "Oh yeah, I saw that program Long Way Down," and Ewan looked sort of quite disgruntled the fact that you suddenly rolled up on a bicycle in the middle of nowhere, making them look, well, because they had all these support vehicles. Maybe they weren't sort of quite so tough and hard after all. But I think the point is that in order to make a TV show like that, you have to have an entourage of vehicles and producers and that's the way you have to do it. The other end of the scale is you do it like I did it, which is without support, but the result is you don't have it very well documented. So it's just a different thing, really. It's a different sort of, and it provides a different experience for you as the traveler. I don't think I would want to do a trip like theirs. I mean, yes, you get the recognition, you've got the money in it, and I'm sure it was great fun for those guys, but I just don't think I'm one of those types of people who would enjoy being part of a media circus. I sort of, if I ride my bike into a town, I want to be able to meet people on their own merit and for them not for, because as soon as you have big cameras in the mix, it sort of changes how people act towards you, and suddenly it's just a completely different feel to traveling. Whereas if you're just on your own, you'll see a completely different side of the people that you meet along the way.
And is there a big difference around the world, or are we all pretty much the same? We've got the same stresses, we've got the same needs, we've got the same requirements. Is there a huge difference as you go around, or when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, we're all pretty similar?
Yeah, I'm a great believer in that theory, although I don't want to sound too trite and simplistic. Of course, there are huge differences, most notably in people's financial in terms of how much money people have and access to healthcare and all the things that we take for granted in a country like this. But yeah, once you drill through the layers of language, colors of skin, religious differences, belief systems, cultural differences, all of those, almost not all, but learn all of those factors, I think that people are the same. And one of the programs that I worked to set up with UNESCO was on creating cultural exchange programs where I gave out cameras, both still and video cameras, to kids, groups of kids in the different countries, and they would make a short film about themselves and where they lived in the world, and then we would exchange those those little portraits, those 10-minute video portraits with children of their similar age in other cultures, because underneath all the differences, I believe that we are all the same, and people want similar things. They want to live peaceful lives. They want to, have enough food on the table to feed their family. They want to be happy. They want the same things as we do here in the West. And if you can somehow sort of provide people a little a portal for them to see how we are all the same, then I think we would perhaps be more empathetic towards people living in other cultures. And I think that, in order to this is me sounding a bit getting on my high horse, but to solve some of the big problems that we are facing, like climate change, I think we do need to see through those differences in order to work together collectively to solve them. So that's it.
Well, let's play some words that really sort of emphasise the whole vibe of the show, doing something that you really don't know it's going to work, but you just need to do it. This is Jim Carrey.
My father could have been a great comedian, but he didn't believe that was possible for him. And so he made a conservative choice. Instead, he got a safe job as an accountant. And when I was 12 years old, he was let go from that safe job. And our family had to do whatever we could to survive. I learned many great lessons from my father, not the least of which was that you can fail at what you don't want. So you might as well take a chance on doing what you love.
Now, it's become a big question for me, that do you take a chance on doing what you love, or do you find out that you love doing something because you've taken a chance on it? And it seems to be a different spin. So when you had this idea, and I imagine you went back and you said to your family, look, I've had a few beers in Paris, this is what I'm going to do, me and my mate Steve, we're going to start cycling around the world. Were you surrounded by people going, yeah, that's a brilliant thing, go for it? Or were you surrounded by people going, hang on, do you really know what you're doing?
Yeah, I think the latter, because my family, for example, were, I think, quite taken aback with the whole idea, because, I mean, they were, sensibly, they pointed out that neither Steve nor myself had done anything like this before. And even though it was theoretically doable by anybody, pedaling a boat across an ocean is a potentially very dangerous thing to do, and you could die doing it. And as it turned out, I did have some scary experiences throughout the journey, where I think, looking back, I am lucky to sort of be talking to you now. And all our friends, I remember going, in the pub in London and going to telling our friends we were going to do this trip. And there's something in England we have called tall poppy syndrome, where we don't like people to succeed. We don't like people to go off and do something that they might get some recognition at, or rather, we don't like them to do something outside of the mold of what we expect them to do. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I know exactly what you mean, and it's very different to the Americans. The Americans go, whoa, and go for it. And in the United Kingdom, and this is to the listeners, if there is a football or a soccer cup final, and there's a big team that's really going to win, we will always support the one that you don't expect to win. It's just the way that the English and the UK people do it. We don't like the champions, do we? We like the underdogs. We like the people battling against their weight somehow.
Right, and I think everyone loves an underdog, but for some reason here in the UK we have this very negative approach to people who want to go off and do something a bit different. And that was our experience when we told our friends that we were going to do this trip. But in a way that made us, I think, even more determined to kind of prove them wrong. They were like, shut up, go and get the beers in. You're not going anywhere. You'll get like 5 miles down the road and you'll be back in the pub. So that made us more determined, not only to kind of start at least set off, but also hopefully be able to keep the thing going, because there was a real worry that, oh my God, if we have to abort the whole thing once we reach Miami and go back to London, there would just be the total laughing stock of all our friends.
Yeah, but would you? Because you would still have tried. And the world is full of non-triers, the people that are sitting in their cubicles going, yeah, you'll never do that, you'll never do this, and they're giving excuses. At least you gave it a go. I would say to you, I'll buy the rounds in, mate, because you gave it a go.
You don't know my friends. I'm just kidding. No, I think you're right. And people do. And I found this in Australia as well. Like the Americans, like you say, they're very supportive, and I think they still have that real pioneering spirit. Because their country is quite new. So if you're saying, yeah, I'm going to rollerblade across the US, which is what I ended up doing, I have no idea how to rollerblade, but I'm going to do it anyway. They'll really be able to relate to that, because not so many generations ago, their grandparents or great-grandparents were doing exactly that, heading west with just their worldly possessions in the back of a wagon, a covered wagon, for example. But yeah, got to Australia, and it was the same sort of thing. It was that same thing we have here in the UK, where they're kind of, it's almost like jealousy. They're like, they don't want you to do it, but hey, if you do it anywhere, it's like, good on you, mate. And they're sort of, they're actually kind of jealous that they're not doing. So I think what it boils down to is people don't want you to do it in the UK and Australia, because secretly maybe they know that they should probably be doing something a little bit more adventurous with their own lives, and so it sort of shows them up that maybe they should be doing a bit more. What do you think to that?
Well, I think you are absolutely right, and I know when I started this is small fry compared to what you've done, but I know so many people at the beginning were saying to me, well, how are you going to make money on it? How are you going to do that? How are you going to get these people to talk to you? How are you going to do this? And it was just like all these obstacles thrown at me. And quite fortunately, I didn't pay attention. I think I was like you. I just fancied the passion of doing it. And so I sort of ploughed through. But yeah, now the people come up to me and go, oh, you should speak to this person. You should speak to that person. And it is kind of turned full circle. And there's become a bubble of positivity around me. But I do think generally with life, and I'm sure that you found this, there comes a tipping point with something where you become a success vacuum, and then suddenly people become your supporters because they can see that there's a chance that you're going to achieve something, and then it goes full circle. Did you see that with yourself when you're cycling along? Did suddenly the media start paying attention where they didn't want to know at the beginning? Businesses started coming along, that kind of thing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, even the best example would be perhaps my family. And when I set out, my mum, my dad were quite worried, and they were supportive, but they were a little bit baffled by their son's decision to go off on this journey. And I don't think they had really a means to be able to put a value on what we were doing. But once we crossed the Atlantic, and then the first article came out in the, I think there was a piece on Channel 4 news, and there was some articles in the papers here back here in the UK. And once they realised that the establishment was getting on board in terms of national media, then I think that made it okay for them to think it was okay too, and it created a way for them to sort of understand it in a sort of I wasn't just there, you're always going to be 7 years old in your mum's eyes, right? No matter how old you get. So it provided them a way to sort of to value it more. And then even as the journey progressed, I remember it was really, for the first 11 years of this journey, we were doing our own fundraising. We'd arrive in a new town like Miami, San Francisco, in Australia. We'd have to set up shop, put the boat on display. We'd have to give talks, to sell T-shirts at the end of names on the boat for $20. That was how we funded the whole thing for the first 11 years. And that was definitely the hardest part of the journey, much more so than the physical traveling. But after 11 years, finally got to Singapore. And then that tipping point that you mentioned occurred. And it was like, oh, yeah, this guy's going to do it now. It's actually going to happen. And then suddenly I managed to pick up a financial sponsor to take me the rest of the way back to London for the last 2 years. But it was so annoying because the first sort of 11 years, you know that you're going to do it because you have the passion and the drive for it. But it's other people. And it seems like you have to reach a critical mass of popular opinion, of content on websites and articles and whatever, for people to finally accept that you're going to do it. And suddenly everyone's there and like, oh yeah, we knew you were going to do it, and we want to be involved, when of course it's pretty much guaranteed that it's going to happen. But hey, that's just the way the world works, I guess. It is. It's
a metaphor for everything. No matter what you're doing, it always starts that way, and you start off lonely and then you end up in a crowd, don't you?
Yeah, and you just that's the thing for viewers, for your listeners to bear in mind, is like that's the reason why you do have to take a leap of faith on something, because no one's going to be there cheering you at the beginning, or at least very few people are, but they will at the end. But it takes that sort of that first period where you really have to just pay your dues, and no one's going to be congratulating you for it until you get to a certain point, and then suddenly it happens. And that's the weird thing, is like I sometimes say this in my talks to kids. When you look at successful people tend to think that, wow, they must have been born like that, they're born different, there's something special about them, but what of course we don't see is the fact that they've gone through trials and tribulations, the daily struggles that we all face, but we only see the end product. And that's dangerous, because that can be almost discouraging to us, because we don't know their backstory. We don't know all that they have done to get to that point.
What I found fascinating as well, if we sort of jump back, and I know it was a TV program, but to the Ewan and the Charlie programs, at the end, they would always go into a town, they would be riding with their arms up, there'd be sort of high-fiving, and everything is really positive. And since I've been doing this show, I've spoken to Graham Hughes, who was the first man to visit every country on Earth, and I've spoken to people who were the first person to get to the top of Everest and all that kind of stuff. And I've said to him, when you achieved it, was it high five? And literally, to a man and a woman, they've all gone, no, I felt deflated. I thought there was going to be this feeling of joy, but I just kind of thought there must be more to life than this. I put all this effort into it, and it feels exactly the same as it did 10 minutes ago. Did you feel the same when you finished yours? You came in, where did you finish it? Where did you come into?
So we started and finished at the Royal Observatory in East London. So there's a Greenwich Meridian line that runs through it, and you step over a brass line in the cobblestones there at Royal Observatory. So you step over it when you leave, and you step over it when you get back. And when I finished, it was, I think I knew by then that it was going to be an anticlimax, because having done 16 legs of this journey, which involved completing sections across continents where you have a definite end and a beginning, or pedaling across oceans, you arrive at the end of the Pacific, and I knew that, I knew that there was going to be an anticlimax, but crossing the Greenwich line, it was the sense of just peace. I can't think of any other word to describe it. It was the only day, or rather, it was the only time on the entire 13-year journey where I felt at peace with myself. And up until that point, for the previous 15 years, including the preparation, it had just been like very stressful, always too many things to do. Worrying about, how am I going to get through this border? How am I going to get the visa to get into this country? How am I going to, get enough money together to do this bit? Worry all the things that, all of us have to worry about. But it was this sort of wonderful, as I was walking the last 10 feet to the line, and there were a lot of people, there were hundreds and hundreds of people there to see me in. So in that sense, it was a very euphoric moment, and my parents were there. I hadn't seen my family for 13 years, and of course they looked a bit older and frailer since the last time I'd seen them, but I just felt this sense of peace. I walked over the line, and it was done.
And did you put an act on? Did you put an act on for the crowd?
No, and that was the weird thing. I was live on Sky TV, and the guy with, and of course the media, descended, and you're surrounded by woolly microphones suddenly, and everyone asking questions, which was fine and good, and they were expecting some demonstrative explosion of like fists in the air, like you said, or like, I've done it, and well, I've beaten the earth, and I've conquered the planet, or whatever people. And I just cried. I just cried a little bit, and I just thought, I just said, 13 years coming to an end. It's been a long trip, it's been a long journey, and I'm happy. I'm just really looking forward to seeing my family, and I think I was completely didn't do what they were hoping, which was something way more testosterone driven.
Well, I think that's life again anyway, isn't it? When you're working towards something, we don't celebrate, do we? And I hear it time and time again that people say to me, you really need to celebrate. You really need to focus in on an achievement and reward yourself with a couple of beers or something. But when you are focused on such a big task, it's like, right, I've achieved that, next bit, I've achieved that, and you never actually assess what you've done. Do you lay in your bed now and have dreams that you're travelling, or are you still sort of totally in peace?
No, but when I finished this journey, I was so sick of traveling. Even the sight of a map would turn my stomach. I had just been, you can do everything too much, right?
Yeah.
And I had just been out there for too long, and I'd known that I was ready to finish this thing at least a year before I finished it. I remember actually walking through the town of Aleppo in Syria, and I had had a wonderful experience cycling through Syria. It was probably the most favorite country of mine in all of the 37 countries that I travel through. And it's very hard for me to look at what I see on the news and reconcile it with my experience of traveling through that country. But anyway, I remember walking through Aleppo about a year before I finished, and I just knew that I was ready to. I was like, you know what, you should not be traveling anymore. I had just become this machine that was fully adapted to traveling and circumnavigating the planet. I was just like a well-oiled machine, but in terms of emotionally, I was absolutely buggered. Excuse my French. I just was ready to be done, and so the few weeks and months after I finished the journey, I just wanted to be somewhere where I didn't have to move on all the time. And it's taken me quite a while to assimilate myself back into society. Part of that process has been writing a book, a series of books about the adventure, and that's actually helped me, I think, get over some of the more traumatic things that happened on the journey. But the book writing has allowed me to sort of put the whole thing behind me finally, put it to bed, and now I can look at a map again, and I'm thinking, I wouldn't mind going to there, actually, without feeling physically sick at the prospect.
So, do you call yourself an explorer or a traveller? Because I'm always fascinated by this. I've spoken to, as I say, lots of people now, and certain people are travelling around the world, and they're doing it, in cars and motors or whatever, and they call themselves a traveller. Do you know what the difference between an explorer and a traveller is?
Oh, this is the problem, trying to attach a label to you. Almost have to try and frame yourself so people kind of, in a very short amount of time, they can sum up who you are. So in your Twitter handle, for example, like, what are you? Are you a scientist, or are you a traveler, or are you an explorer? So, and their labels are always sort of tricky things. I think that I wouldn't call myself an explorer, because I think the only real explorers these days are people who are heading into outer space or into deep ocean. They're really the only two mediums left to explore properly. Every inch of the earth, otherwise, or of the air, has been explored. A traveler, I would call myself a traveler as well. But I think the things that I've done and I'm interested in doing in future do involve an element of risk and of not knowing how things are going to turn out. I think that was the writer Paul Theroux once wrote that that tourists are people who don't know where they've been. They go to so many places they don't know where they've been. But travelers or adventurers are people who don't know where they're going, and I think that sort of sums those two definitions up quite nicely for me, at least.
Well, one of the things that fascinated me, and I sort of mentioned it in the introduction, and it's always fascinated me, this is border crossings. Why, with so much border, why you can't just stroll over a mountain and go into a country? Do you actually have to physically find the crossing, or could you just do that? Could you just sort of think, oh, it's only a small country, I just go over here, nip across, nobody will know, and I'll be in the other one quite quickly?
Yeah, you can do that. I mean, I've done that through, I'm just trying to think now. through East Timor, so going from west to East Timor, that was a border crossing. But for example, going from Sudan to Egypt, you cross the border there, and there's no red line in the sand. There are no guards. I just paddle across to the nearest town. Then what you're supposed to do in a lot of towns, you then turn yourself into the local police station or immigration point, because ultimately you need to get stamped in into that country. You need a stamp in your passport. So sometimes you'll have to travel. I mean, getting into, I think it was Ethiopia, you have to travel about 100 odd miles before you reach the nearest town where you get your passport stamped. So it's sort of a variety of different things. Going into Tibet, I remember just pedaling across the border because it's now theoretically part of China. I never did a border crossing. I just entered Tibet and then left again once I entered Nepal.
It's going to be really annoying when you lose your passport, when you need to get a new one and you have to send your old one back with all the stamps in it. That's going to be quite disappointing, isn't it?
Well, and you know what? I've actually ended up losing one of my passports. I think part of the way around the world, and so the passport that I have right now, I actually have two British passports, because if you if you want to go into a country like Syria and you've been through Israel, then you can't get in. You can't get into a lot of Arab countries if you've been through Israel. So you have to have two passports, and you get the Israeli stamp in one, and that allows you to travel through the Arabian countries in the other passport. But so anyway, I've got my stamps are in quite a few different passports, but yeah, the one that I have right now has quite a few. So it will be kind of weird. Maybe I think aren't you able to keep your old passport if you ask for it? I think they just chop the kind of important bit out, and then they'll send it back to you, I think.
Oh, I thought I had to lose mine, because I used to travel a lot, and I was quite proud of all the stamps I got. And I remember being quite disappointed when I had to send it off, and that was it. My sort of travelling history had gone.
Yeah, no, I think if you ask the passport office, I think you'll find they'll give it back to you.
So with your life now, it's fascinating that you have such a big part of your life. Are you defined by what you've done? Are you defined by who you are personally, or how people perceive you because of what you've actually done now?
That is an excellent question, David. And I think you can probably apply it to a lot of different sports people, musicians, and it's a question that I've been asking myself a lot recently, because I've now finally finished the book series about this last journey, and I've been turning my thoughts towards what I want to do next. And I definitely do not want to be defined by what I've done so far. At the same time, I'm thinking, okay, well, there's a reason why I did 13 years around the world by human power. I wasn't just trying to get rich or it's a terrible. Basically, there's no money to show for it. There's no career as such. But on a sort of personal and philosophical and spiritual level, I've now sort of my takeaway from that journey is something that I've written in the conclusion of my book, and it's something that I want to take forward into what I do next. And so, adventure, would it necessarily involve adventure? Yeah, maybe, but I don't see myself necessarily as a sort of a serial adventurer. I'm not actually that interested in the different forms of travel that you use in adventure. I'm not that interested in bikes or boats or walking or rollerblading. They were all just means to be able to pursue this line of questioning that I started in London all those years ago. So what I want to do next, I think, will involve adventure, but only because it's a sort of the appropriate vehicle for me to be able to kind of pursue this line of questioning that I've always had. So getting back to your question, I think that where I'm at in my life right now, I'm 47 years old. I need to be able to make a living. Yeah, I need to be able to pay the bills. So in that sense, I do need to, in a sense, monopolize on what I've done so far. And I do talks based on the fact that, I'm the first person to circumnavigate the planet by human power, blah, 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 blah. Certainly. But also, I don't want to sort of become like a dancing monkey doing the same thing but in a slightly different way, which is the danger of being an adventure. You end up sort of trying to find a different way to do the same thing. So that's where I'm at right now, and I've thought of something I want to do. I'm sort of going to be announcing it fairly shortly, and I'm really excited about it. I think it fulfills my passion. I think it'll help me still be able to make a living, but it's going to broaden my horizons, not just limit them to what I've done already.
Well, what I find amazing is the simple fact that you were the first. And if anybody listens to my shows and I speak to people that have done like you've done, I always pose this because it just kind of blows my mind that nobody had done it before you. Nobody can do it after you. You are the only person who's ever going to stand on this planet that does that. Does that sort of amaze you? Or are you just kind of, oh, well, I suppose so? Because more often than not, the people I speak to, they don't seem to get as excited by that fact as I seem to do. You're Trivial Pursuit, as I always say. You are a Trivial Pursuit question.
Well, you're very, very flattering words, David. I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I'm a little bit surprised that more people are more interested in the genre of human-powered circumnavigations. And I think it's something that people perhaps find a hard thing to get their head around. Like they can get, if you were to say, I'm gonna like sailing, for example, all these other well-established genres like climbing, like people can understand. Like, okay, I'm going to climb Everest, Sir Edmund Hillary. And people can sort of understand, okay, the mountain, you've got to get to the top of it. It's very high, very cold, very, very dangerous. But if you can get to the top of it, he'll come back, and that will be an amazing thing. So I think there are other kind of feats that people have done that are more tangible for people. But there are other feats that people have done, which I think probably they gained a lot more recognition. The Kon-Tiki journey, for example, Thor Heyerdahl. For those of you who are not familiar, he built a balsa wood raft and sailed it across part of the Pacific in the 1950s. And he didn't make it all the way across the Pacific. He used sails. It was quite unusual for that period, certainly. But it wasn't, I mean, for example, compared to the first person, Joshua Slocum, to sail around the world, or the first person to go to the moon, I don't think it's that amazing. But everybody knows the story. Lots of people know Thor Heyerdahl, and so there's a cult following there. I think also an element of we weren't particularly good publicists. We didn't have a big publishing, a big PR machine behind us. So that maybe has something to do why people are not sort of not more aware of the journey that not just I did, but all the people that were involved with my journey. That's why we maybe didn't get as much recognition as we might have done.
But that's the beauty of it, isn't it? That it's something that's going to grow. It's a starting point. And your new adventures that you've got in your head, the new plans, are they going to be easier to do just because you've done this? Now you've got that name that people look at it and go, oh blimey, yeah, he has done something. Yeah, okay, we'll put money into this. Is it going to make it easier for you?
I'm really hoping so, because I do not want to be scrabbling around in shopping centres with a boat on display trying to get £20 out of people's pockets like I have in the past.
20 quid.
So I'm 47 now. Age catches up with you a bit, and you think, well, yeah, if I'm going to do this next project, I do want to have it. I think I do want to have it funded before I set out. Because that was, I think, the hardest part of the last trip was having to stop in a new town and work for 4 or 5 months and do the next bit. So but I really don't know, David. I don't know if I mean, I know I have something of a name for myself, but I really don't know how far that goes as far as actually bringing in sponsorship dollars. We'll find out here shortly.
Of course we will. Let's play the theme of the whole show. These are the words that Steve Jobs said back in 2005 and really have huge resonance with me and most people that come on the show. This is Steve Jobs.
Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart even when it leads you off the well-worn path. And that will make all the difference.
Do you buy into those words, Jason?
I do indeed. I do. And I think that Steve Jobs summed up, I think, one of the lasting lessons that I took away from that journey. And I'm one of the things I go and talk to people about, children about, is you do have to take a leap of faith.
It is interesting with your journey, though, that you got to a certain point and you were sick to death on it, the actual travel, and so it became more about the world, more about schools, more about education. Did you decide that you had to fill in that void because you needed something to channel your efforts to make it around?
Yeah, I did personally. I think everybody's different. There are probably people out there who could sustain themselves for 13 years just with the notion that they're going to step across a brass line in a cobblestone courtyard one day and claim to be the first person to do something or the fastest person to do it or whatever. But I'm not one of those people. I love for me it was more about the journey than about the destination, and you need both. Paradoxically, you need to have the goal to be able to set out in the first place. But I think there is a danger with these things of then the goal becoming all important, and you can become something where you're striving so hard to reach this little light at the end of the tunnel, but it's not getting bright enough, quick enough, that you end up burning out. So I knew that if it was just the adventure and if it was just the end goal that I was going to be motivating myself towards on this journey, that I wouldn't have made it. I would have given up and gone home like my partner did. So I knew that doing something with the journey other than just doing it for the sake of doing it, i.e. developing educational programs, working with teachers on developing curriculum around world citizenship and environmental stewardship, those became my overarching reasons to keep going on the journey. And I the weird thing was I got run over by a drunk driver in Colorado and had both my legs broken in 95 it was. And at the time it seemed like a total disaster. I thought I was going to have to go home back to England. I didn't have any money at that point. I'd almost run out of all of my savings. And I thought, I'm not going to be able to spend the 9 months it'll take here to recuperate. But I ended up being able to stay because my surgeon let me stay up at his cabin up in the mountains, and I went around to local schools, and that was when the educational component really kicked off for me. But after the 9 months of staying there, I looked back and I realized that, wow, if that guy hadn't hit me on the road, I wouldn't have got to spend that 9 months in Colorado. I wouldn't have got to really identify what my real passion is with adventure, and I probably would have given up partway through and gone home. So the weird thing is that sometimes on the journey things will happen that you can't really understand their importance or why they're happening, but it's only with the benefit of hindsight that you can look back and say, yeah, that happened, and that had to happen for me to understand this, or for me to get this lesson in order to make the journey more worthwhile, or for me just to finish the journey at all. So some of these things happen in life that you just have to roll with and you have to go with, and you think there's a reason for them to happen, but I just don't know what they are right now.
The good dots and the bad dots, they all blur into one, don't they, really?
I guess there are no such things as bad dots. No, there's always some kind of silver lining to the bad, to even to the black dots.
So just before we send you back in time on a one-on-one with your younger self, this is my last question, and this is a good question, Jason. It's occurred to me, and as it came into my head, I was actually proud of this. So here we go. This is a big build-up. This interview finishes, and you walk into a room and all your friends and family are standing there and they've all got walking boots on and rucksacks, and they say, Jason, we want to do this, come with us. Would you do it? Would you undertake it again?
Oh, why would you ask such a question?
Because it just popped into my head.
Yeah. If I was, okay, right now, aged 47, I would say no. If I was 26, I would say, bring it on. Let's go. And that's because you've asked an impossible question, David, because I've done this journey, because I've done it.
You don't get this with Parkinson.
I know. What's that?
You don't get this with Michael Parkinson, this kind of question.
I know you don't. You put me on the real spot. But it's the same. The same question as people ask me. Oh, would you do it again? No. Having done it, I would say no. I wouldn't do it again because I've done it. I know what it's like. It was an amazing thing to do for a 26-year-old. Yes, it was amazing. But I want to do other things now. But yeah, if you'd asked me 30 years ago, I would have said yes immediately, like I did Steve, in 1992, without a doubt.
But what if it's a different direction? You see something different?
Well, if you said to me, yeah, okay, let's go off and for 6 weeks, let's go and let's walk to Greece or something. Yeah, I'd be up for it. If it was with friends as well, because I also realized during my journey that, being alone traveling is all very well, but there's nothing like being with another person to be able to share the journey. So if there were a bunch of good friends, I would be up for that. Yeah.
That's what you need. You need a bunch, don't you? So when one of them starts to annoy you, which always happens, you can just sort of like sidle off with somebody else. And when he starts annoying you, you can sort of move around. I think it's much safer to do it in a group, isn't it?
It is, although I have travelled with a large group through Australia. We mountain biked through Australia, and I had 8 teenagers and 2 teachers with me. And the only problem with that, though, is it becomes it was like crowd control after a while, trying to get everyone to agree on one thing.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. So I found that the ideal number of people to travel with is actually 3. 2. If it's just 2 of you, you don't have any referee to kind of adjudicate when you start arguing. More than 3 people gets to be difficult to agree on anything, so you're always compromising on what direction you're going or where you sleep for the night, blah 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 blah. But 3 people is kind of seems to me the ideal number, where you've got one person to sort of be independent when there's a fallout, but there's 3 of you to kind of make lively conversation and for it to be a real laugh.
Well, let's send you back in time. I really don't want this conversation to finish, but this is the end of the show when we're going to send you back in time on another journey to have a one-on-one with your younger self. And if you could go back in time and speak to the younger Jason, what advice would you give? And what age would you choose, I suppose? I'm going to play the theme, and when it fades, you're up. This is The Sermon on the Mic.
Here we go with the best bit of the show, the Sermon on the Mic, the Sermon on the Mic.
Okay, Jason, this is your 47-year-old avatar speaking to you. And you know what? This is a long time in the future, but you are actually in the same house as your older self is speaking right now. I'm actually clearing out the house that you grew up in. Your mum is getting quite old now, and so you're gonna I'm having to move the house out. And you've been traveling for a long time. Sorry. You've been traveling for a long time, and at some point, when you get a bit older, you're going to go. You're going to leave home, and you're going to go to school. You're going to go to university, and you're going to meet. You're going to meet a very special guy who's going to propose this ridiculous idea for you to do. Sorry, you always were a bit of a crier, a bit of a baby. And he's going to propose this ridiculous idea for you to go around the world by human power. And up until that point, you are a bit of a rebel. You're a bit of a misfit. You're an anti-authoritarian. You don't really believe in fitting in with the rest of society. You're having a real hard time finding a direction in life, and so this guy's going to think of this idea for you to do. And at some point early on that trip, you're going to find yourself pedaling out into the Atlantic on this contraption, this 26-foot by 4.5-foot wide boat, and it'll be the first day of that journey, and the land will slip below the horizon astern, and you'll be heading into this huge expanse of blue, the Atlantic Ocean, and you will have only done maybe a couple of days worth of sailing on the ocean before with your dad when you were 13, 14 years old, and you will honestly think, what on earth am I doing? Why am I doing this? Okay, but you've got to remember this one thing, okay? It will be fine. It will be okay, because even though you are taking a leap of faith into this abyss of not knowing how it's going to turn out, not knowing if you're going to survive this ocean crossing to Miami, you have to know that this is going to be probably the most stupid but liberating thing you will ever do, because over the next 3.5 months, over that ocean, through the storms, through the monotony of the pedaling, you will take the biggest leap of faith of outside of your comfort zone that you will have ever taken. And it's just a thing that you need to do, all right, to find your place in the world, to find your sense of place within yourself, because stepping outside of your comfort zone into this ocean, okay, it's going to teach you some really useful things about yourself. You're going to learn who you really are. You're going to de-learn all you thought you knew about yourself, all you thought you were capable of or not capable of, as the case may be. You are going to recognize your full potential as a human being. All right. Once you've done this crossing and you step off the boat onto land in Miami, you will know yourself as a human being. You will know what you're capable of. Okay, you will know your human potential, and you will be able to then navigate a path through the rest of the expedition, and I think navigate a path the rest of your life that will bring you lasting happiness and fulfillment. So you need to, on that first day of the Atlantic, you need to go with it, take the leap of faith, and it will be fine. Those dots will connect, and you'll look back and you realize, as I'm saying now, that you needed to do that crossing. You needed to take that leap of faith because it's made you who you are today.
Jason, how can our audience connect with you, sir?
Well, there is the predictable website, which is jasonexplorer.com. That's probably the best way, or I'm on Twitter, which is Explorer Jason, at Explorer Jason on Twitter.
We will have all the links on the show notes. Jason, thank you so much for spending time with us today, joining up those dots. And please come back again when you have more dots to join up. You come back whenever you want, mate, because I do believe that by joining up the dots and connecting our pasts is the best way to build our futures. Jason, thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Join Up Dots, brought to you exclusively by podcastersmastery.com, the only resource that shows you how to create a show, build an income, and still have time for the life that you love. Check out podcastersmastery.com now.
David doesn't want you to become a faded version of the brilliant self you were once to become. So he's put together an amazing guide for you called the 8 Pieces of Advice that every successful entrepreneur practices, including the 2 that changed his life. Head over to joinupdots.com to download this amazing guide for free, and we'll see you tomorrow on Join Up Dots.